Again, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker. Aaron Hodges is going to speak to us today in using multisensory stimulation to improve music perception for cochlear implant users. As he might have mentioned it a few minutes ago, Aaron works with Dr. Matthew Fitzgerald and Dr. Nick Blevins at Stanford, both of whom have spoken to our chapter in the past, so we're very familiar with them. Aaron and I were able to meet in December, where I was the subject of Aaron's research, which he will be telling you more about today. Aaron grew up as a self-described military brat in Virginia and moved around quite a bit, but graduated from the class of 2021 at Harvard University, where he studied biomechanical engineering and music. And so today, now he's a second-year master's student, graduate student at Stanford University, studying music, science, and technology in the Center for Computer Research in Music and Acoustics. He conducts research in Professor Takaku Fujioka's Neuromusic Lab, focusing on EEG analysis and using somatosensory stimulation to enhance music perception. He will clarify what all this means, okay? He has presented his work at various conferences. I won't name them all, but a number of cochlear implant symposiums, music and hearing health workshops, and others. And he is his research team received a 2022 Grammy Museum grant for their project on empathetic listening and recurring audio engineers to mix music for individual preferences for CI users. During his research, Aaron has created a portfolio of creative compositions in electronic music and has worked with embedded systems to create electronic instruments. Aaron's hobbies include dancing, playing oboe, and writing music. So Aaron, we're very pleased to have you join us today. We really appreciate your taking the time and look forward to hearing your remarks.
Awesome. Thank you for that introduction, Elliot. And for this, I definitely want to see if anyone has like feedback, and definitely ask questions if you have it during the presentation. I'm very open to that. And also thank you for giving me the space to speak and present to you all. So I'll jump right in. Okay. So I'll be presenting my presentation on the project I'm currently working on that Elliot was able to partake in, which is using multisensory stimulation to improve music perception for cochlear implant users. What this means is integrating things such as what you feel, like tactilely or finger sensations, with what you hear, and like trying to create an association between those two stimulus, and seeing if this augments your experience when listening to music or different type of auditory stimulus. So the motivation behind this is, after having conversations with a lot of cochlear implant users and doing a lot of research within the field, there's still a lot of struggle within getting music perception and like distinguishing between different pitches, for instance, or listening to music within really like loud environments. And so some of the studies have looked into entering this thing called somatosensory stimuli, which is where you integrate multiple perceptions such as tactile, for instance, and auditory, and have this multisensory integration where you're able to make up for lost information by, for instance, having the same type of stimulus through the fingertips as opposed to what you're hearing auditorily. And some of these papers have looked at these things called rhythmic cues, where if you look at the onset of a note in a musical context, you can take out the rhythm and then provide those cues to your fingertips as small as just like your one index finger, which has been shown to improve things such as melody recognition tasks, melody contour tasks. And there are a few other studies that have kind of focused on the vibrotactile side. And with this, there's also been, with these rhythmic cues, there's been using like the onsets of speech. So like every syllable that I'm speaking, there have been some studies that have given these tactile cues for each syllable so that you can follow better what's being said. But there are actually a few, like a lack of studies that have studied the spatial patterns that could be associated with this. So for instance, as noted from the other bullet point here, they only use like one index finger, but you could also potentially use all four of your fingers, or use your fingers in your neck and your body, for instance, to also relay this information. And so this study is looking into this thing called implicit learning, where we're trying to see if we introduce a pattern, such as a pattern of four fingers, and we encode that into like pinch information, for instance, where let's say like you have like the note like A, and you want to encode that tactically, you can set up a pattern on your four fingertips to relate that to what you're hearing. And we're trying to see if cochlear implant users and also normal hearing users can integrate that and learn these new patterns. So I'm going to go through a few studies that might be of interest that I'm basing the study on. And this one, the first one here, is a vibrotactile study. So I want to delineate my study from vibrotactile to what we're doing here, which is more pneumatic. So vibrotactile typically has these actuators that vibrate at different frequencies, and they typically have different intensities that you can set notes at. So for my example where I mentioned the note A, if A is like a 400 hertz sine wave like that you play for A, you can also represent that as like 100 hertz intensity stimulation on your fingertips. And as you go up notes, so let's say we go from A to B to C, if you're like on the piano, you're like going up the piano, you can increase the intensity of those frequencies on your fingertips, for instance. And so this study did that by using vibrotactile stimulation, and ended up using also vocoder stimulus, which is where you take different frequencies of sound and you put it into these bandpass filters. So let's say like if, again, the note A, you pass it through this like bandpass filter, it'll go through like these four different channels that it's so that you'll get like any note from like A to like the next A up on the piano will be filtered to that one channel. And then if the next channel has higher frequencies, all those frequencies will go to that channel. So you have the vocoder stimulus for that. And so they did a comparison between what we're calling vocoder stimulus, which is the CI simulator, and comparing that with cochlear implant users. And what they found from their study was that putting the vibrotactile stimulation with what the individuals were hearing improved performance on this what they call melodic contour task, which is where if the melody is going ascending, or if it's descending, or if it's stagnant, can the individual pick up on that? And so we kind of based our paradigm on this study, but instead of doing vibrotactile, we ended up doing pneumatic, which is using like pressure stimulation on the fingertips, for instance, which I'll dive in a little bit further in the presentation. And I'll quickly go through the rest of these papers, but this paper in particular is focusing on the rhythmic cues that I mentioned earlier. And from here, like from the graphs, you can see here that adding the rhythmic cues actually also increased the percent correct. So this kind of showed the importance of rhythm in regards to perception in music. And it also delineated musicians and non-musicians, which actually came of interest in my study later on, because I started realizing that the musicians found the task a little bit easier than the non-musicians, but the non-musicians seem to be benefiting a lot from it. And so looking at these different population groups, whether in cochlear implant users and normal hearers, seems to elucidate of being really important during the study as well. This study was looking at if you were to diverge from Western tonal scales and you do things such as microtonal scales that we like Western listeners wouldn't be as used to listening to, this study was able to show that individuals could still pick up on these different scales that they weren't familiar with, which was really promising for introducing a new pattern or association to something that you wouldn't typically run into. So this was promising for integrating a learning phase for the study. And this last study is touching on vibrotactile gloves, which is a common device that is used for haptic feedbacks when integrating it into music. And this is something that I'm considering going down that route. But I guess like one feedback I wanted to ask everyone here is kind of like interest after hearing about the study, or like even just haptics in general, if there is interest in that, and if it actually aligns with what that can actually help individuals hear better when it comes to listening to music. So the questions that I was looking at in my study were, one, what avenues of tactile stimulation or somatosensory stimulation can be used to improve music perception? whether that was looking at the fingertips or looking at the neck or looking at different parts of the body. But I ended up going with the fingertips just because some papers pointed towards sensitivity being retained within the fingertips as you progress in age as well. And so looking at this avenue and also trying to prove if adding adding tactile stimulation can help, we wanted to have something more quantitative to prove that. The second question is, are participants able to statistically learn how to interpret tactile stimulation mapped to different notes? Meaning, if I'm giving you like all these different spatial patterns on your fingertips, in 8 minutes or in 10 minutes, are you able to pick up on those patterns implicitly and see if you can perform better on the task? And the third question is, with training, is tactile stimulation sufficient alone in music perception tasks, or can subjects improve performance in tasks without the supplementary stimulation eventually? This means that when you integrate the tactile stimulation, which is like the finger sensations that I'll explain in my study a little bit further, with what you're hearing, are participants performing better? And then if I take away the tactile stimulation and then play the same exact auditory stimulus, do you perform better without it? So maybe it could be used as a training mechanism, for instance. So the hypotheses for the study are that the addition of tactile stimulation through rhythmic cues while listening to audio may potentially allow participants to encode additional pitch information through association learning, which is statistical learning, with the goal of improving music perception. And the second hypothesis is that CI users and normal hearing participant listening through vocoded audio will have the highest accuracy on pitch discrimination tasks with audio and tactile stimulation together. And so you'll see in the paradigm on experiment 2, where we're comparing cochlear implant users with normal hearing participants that are listening to vocoded stimulus, and the hope is that they will perform on similar measures with the added tactile stimulus. So the first experiment was a pilot study where we first started off with 9 Stanford students using the vocoded audio. 5 of them were musicians, 4 of them were non-musicians, to touch on my earlier point of seeing how the different population groups would differ. And there's 3 different parts on a pitch discrimination task called a 2FAC task, which I'll touch on later on the presentation. And each of these phases are a pre-test, a learning phase, which goes into melodies, and a post-test. And each of these phases have 4 conditions on this first study, which is vocoded audio only, so you're only listening to the audio, vocoded audio tactile together, so the audio and the tactile stimulation at the same time, tactile only, and then original and tactile together, because I wanted to see if playing the original to the vocoded audio would make a difference in learning. And we ended up using, from the first paper that I introduced, some of the complex tones that they created, and ended up vocoding it with 4 channels. So that's those bandpass filters, or like those bands that I was mentioning, where if your frequency of that pitch is in any of these ranges, it's going to go to that channel. And so it'll end up kind of distorting the sound, and it's supposed to mimic what it might sound like to hear through a cochlear implant, but it's definitely not completely comparable. And the melodies that we used were common melodies like Mary Had a Little Lamb, Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, the good stuff. So this is what the 2FAC task is, so 2 forced alternative choice task for both the pre and post test. And so what the participants go through is they're presented 2 different tones. You can kind of see here tone 1 and tone 2. They might, and they're in different pitches. So it might be, for instance, if you think about the piano, like C and then F, from like C and F on middle C, for instance, or different notes on different instruments as well. And one of them is higher in pitch. And so we ask participants which is higher. And so, for instance, if they say 1 with tone 1, which is lower in pitch, they would be incorrect. And so we would give them direct feedback so that they can continue learning. And we go through each of those conditions I mentioned. So like audio only, tactile only, and then audio tactile integrated together. And for the study's design, participants go through this for 20 minutes with these different pitch pairs that are either higher in pitch or lower in pitch. And then they have the 4 different conditions again: audio tactile together, audio only, tactile only, and audio original. For the melody recognition tasks, they get presented all the 8 different melodies, and then after the melody is played for them, it's played for them when they're also feeling on their fingertips. So the audio that they're hearing, the rhythmic onsets are directly related to what's being heard. And so we're asking them which melody are they hearing, and they have to identify that, and that's the implicit learning part of it. And then the post test is where we're trying to compare the results of did you improve after that phase, and compare the post to the pre. So the second experiment is one that Elliot participated for, and for that, currently I have Elliot and then 4 normal hearing participants that are currently collecting data for. And for this task, it's the same as the first experiment. However, the normal hearing participants listen exclusively to vocoder audio, so there's no original audio anymore. And this cochlear implant users listen to the original audio, so that complex tone, which is just kind of thinking of notes on the piano. And the difference arises from the melody. So now in that learning melody phase, there's you get presented all of the songs in like kind of like one time through, and you also feel them tactically on your finger. And then the second round through, we'll throw in these things called deviants. So like one of the songs you hear might have an error in it, which has a slight delay in the tactile stimulus. So like you'll hear Mary Had a Little Lamb, and you also feel Mary Had a Little Lamb on your fingertips, and Mary Had a Little Lamb will feel right on your fingertips, but then when you're hearing it, it might sound a little bit off, like slightly delayed on one note. And so we asked participants to indicate whether or not they heard that delay, and this is supposed to establish like implicit learning for that. So this is the further design for the study. So we started off again with the pre-test, which is again 20 minutes. And I actually made a slight tweak after getting some feedback from Elliot, because one thing that he stated from the task was that having the tactile condition only, where you're presented with just the tactile stimulation alone, was a little bit confusing, because it's like, how do you say like what's higher in pitch when you're only finger sensations, because it's not inherently associated yet. And so I ended up switching the paradigm a little bit and starting with like audio only and integrating that together and switching that over. And that's happening for both the normal hearing participants listening to the vocoded stimulus and the cochlear implant users listening to the original audio. And so the melody task again is 10 minutes, but with the delay factor where you have to identify if there's a delay. And then again, we're applying the post-test versus pre-test. So this is what the apparatus looks like. It's a small little box that's in our neuromusic lab, and it has these 4 channels that are connected to these kind of finger gadgets that have balloons under them. And we have a compressed air tank that's sending kind of like puffs of air to each of these fingers, like whenever there's an onset of a note. So that's where the delineation between like what our project is and a lot of the vibrotactile studies that are out there, because this apparatus doesn't have different intensities. So each sensation is the same as the last. So it's almost like on and off binary. And the reason why we did this is because we wanted to eventually do some EEG analysis, where if you have like the vibrotactile actuators, which are like have metal and also like electronics that can interfere with the EEG, especially if we can't like filter it out with other methods, then you can use something like this, where it's just a on and off pneumatic device that you don't have to worry about that, and you can get better results like for EEGs, for instance. So here are some examples of what the audio sounds like. And so the first one here is the vocoded version of it, and so I'll play that quickly. And then the second one is the next semitone from that. So that's what the normal hearing participants are strictly listening to, and they have to identify from those 2 pitches like which one's higher in pitch. And then for the cochlear implant users, we're introducing the original complex tone, which sounds like this. And then the semitone step next to that. So that's going from like, I forgot what the notes are exactly, but imagine almost like going from C to D. And oh, yes, Lisa? Oh, okay. I thought I saw a raised hand.
Yeah, you did.
Oh. Awesome. Yes.
Sorry. I was wondering, are these, are you including overtones, or are these pure tones?
Yeah, so there are some overtones. So that's what the complex tone is. So there's four different harmonics that are integrated in it, and we were basing it off that vibrotactile study that I mentioned earlier. And so they are complex tones. They're not pure sine tones.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, cool. So these are the results from the study comparing the pre-test versus the post-test from the first study, where we looked at the normal hearing participants listening to the vocoded stimulus. And from that, we were able to see that there was an improvement between the audio-only condition and the tactile-only condition. The tactile only condition being significant was really promising because that's kind of showing that this associative learning might be occurring within that short 10-minute time period. And so we were also curious in looking at the pre versus post test. So I did a couple of ANOVA tests as well, trying to compare the different results. But they weren't statistically significant, but I think it's because I only had 9 participants at the time. But one thing I did see was that when I included the group of just non-musicians, it seemed like a lot of the other, like the audio tactile together was significant. And if you like kind of look back here, it's really close. Like it's zero. It was like 0.7 in significance, so it's like really close. So I definitely want to dive a little bit further into that and see if I can make that delineation a little bit further. And then for experiment 2, where I'm going to be comparing cochlear implant users and normal hearing participants, I also was trying to see if there was a similar trend, if I could get statistical significance from just 4 users, which but that's kind of wishful thinking. But from this, one thing that kind of came out that I started noticing was that, for instance, like the one CI participant that I have performed really well on the task, which could vary depending on an individual's background, or possibly indicate that the task is maybe too easy. So I've been looking at ways to maybe make it more rigorous, or find like another way to make it like more coherent, to see that there is an improvement in certain things. But there was like a slight improvement tactically from the results. And then on the normal hearing participant side, kind of similar thing where the tactile only condition increases, which is pointing towards some type of statistical learning, meaning that the participants are starting to pick up on the pattern associations that they're feeling and what they're hearing. So my first hypothesis wasn't completely confirmed, but there was a slight improvement during this learning phase, as I was kind of saying earlier. But the second hypothesis was confirmed, where participants did perform better, kind of comparing post-test versus pre-test, especially if you look at the tactile condition only, which is like really promising. And I was just trying to relate this back to the results to those papers that I showed earlier, and from the non-musician versus musician standpoint, it seems like maybe non-musicians might potentially benefit particularly from it, especially if they're not as familiar like with like the mapping in a way, because in a way, like some of the musicians kind of pointed out that it feels very corollary to the piano, which makes sense because of how like the number of fingers that you're integrating together, or like how the movement of the tactile stimulation feels is almost corollary to that. And one thing I've thought about doing is making a more explicit task where I experiment with the fingerings of a trumpet or like a clarinet, and maybe seeing if I could train individuals to learn those fingerings kind of through these mappings, and then test them on that. And that could be like a more explicit task, and instead of just kind of hearing and just kind of picking it up and seeing if you perform better on the pre and post. That could be a future part of the study that I'll look into. So, but I do need additional participants, and hopefully we'll continue like analyzing that and looking further into that. So kind of wrapping this up, we ended up testing somatosensory stimulus, that the somatosensory word again, where you're doing this multisensory integration, auditory, tactile together, while doing a 2 forced alternative choice. So that's the pitch discrimination task, which tone is higher. So we tested both of those effects. We explored this different finger mapping on the tactile device to see if it actually enhanced the listening experience during the task that was presented. And based on the results, there was a slight improvement on integrating the tactile stimulus with the pitch discrimination task. And I feel like I do need to explore it further. And I'm also interested in seeing like what directions interest people / would be like most beneficial to exploring more. And so with that, statistical learning through this exposure phase that was merely 10 minutes has shown to maybe even be effective enough to start creating this association between like what you're feeling on your fingertips and then what you're hearing in the melody that's going on. So these are the references of all the kind of the papers that I've used in the study, and then the papers that I mentioned above. Are there any questions? And I can also go back to slides too if people are interested in looking at specific things. So just let me know. Oh, I think you're muted, Elliot.
Yeah, okay. A couple of questions here, and I'll start out with one. I just I thought I heard you to say that you only had, that I was the only CI user you were able to test with this, or I guess my question is how many additional do you hope to get to provide more validity to your data sample?
I'm hoping, I mean, as much as possible is great, but like 10 is like what I'm shooting for. And I've talked to another individual that hopefully I can schedule in April. But yeah, currently I've only been able to test you on this study.
Well, I would volunteer a number of my colleagues on the meeting today, because in our chapter we have a number of cochlear implant users, and I thought the experiment was interesting. I'm glad you didn't give me a letter grade, Aaron, because I probably would have walked out of there with a D. But it was interesting to really try to grasp. I think I did a better job with the audio, differentiating the audio tones, than trying to figure out what was going on with the stimulation of my fingers.
Yes.
That was really hard part. I think it was more of a learned process.
Yes.
And maybe probably would have taken me anyway more time to learn it. But hopefully we could, assuming you're continuing this research, we can maybe get a few more participants from our group here to help you out a little bit.
Yes, I would really appreciate that. And you did really well though. Like that was my point, because you like performed extremely well and like very comparable to other participants. And you did improve on the tactile part as well. And I thought you made a really valid point about the tactile only condition, because as you stated, it was like really confusing to kind of start out that way. And the reason why we started out that way was to randomize it, and like, because in the scientific method world, they're like, oh, well, you didn't randomize it, so then maybe it's biased. But I think it's really important to get the feedback and for it to make a conscious decision that makes more sense to the people that are participating in it. So I really appreciated that feedback.
Let's see, we have some other questions here. Valerie, I see you next.
Hi there, this is Valerie Stafford Malice. I am zooming in from Florida. I am a tone deaf opera singer now, bilaterally implanted. And one of the things that I struggle with as a former singer is the vibrato in my voice, never exactly sure what pitch I'm on. So have you done any work with vocalists?
I haven't done work with vocalists, but I have seen there are some, like on the vibro-tactile side of things, you could use like different intensities to maybe map the vibrato that's going on, especially since you can have like a certain like sine wave or a rectangle wave, or you can modulate the waves that you're sending to these inputs of the vibro-tactile stimulation to represent the vibrato, for instance. And so maybe like integrating one of these gloves and tailoring it very specifically so that it fits your needs, so that it matches something that you're like more familiar with, and you're also able to get the pinch information is something that I think would be really valuable. But I know, at least on my frustration with the field right now has been there hasn't been as much creative exploration for that, because like vibrato's like such a like expressive art form to that. And on the haptic side, there hasn't been like, how do we explore tactile simulation in expression, for instance? And there hasn't been as much research into that. But there are like a couple groups, like one of the papers I mentioned, Jeremy Morazal is like one of the authors on that paper. And he actually introduced this chair in Denmark where like you sit down and it like vibrates you to like the different frequencies of like the art room, and like there's like a DJ, and like it's like a audio visual implementation to it. And I think kind of trying to like carve the expression in the vibrations is something that should be explored more. And I actually hope to do some more work in that as well.
Well, thank you. We're eagerly awaiting that and appreciate everything that you're doing. And thank you for speaking to us today. I'm going to go ahead and mute myself back now.
Thank you. Thank you for your question.
Let's see, Lisa, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so I was wondering, how do you determine that you've got a musician? I mean, like if they took piano lessons for 6 months when they were 5, does that constitute a musician?
Yeah, so I'm actually exploring this question further, and I think the scientific community is realizing how important it is to be more consistent on that, because so many groups have different factors on what they delineate as a musician and a non-musician. Currently, how I'm doing is like the cutoff is if you've in the recent past, like in the recent years, have you like been doing music for 3 years, and like have you been like rehearsing music in the like past 3 years consistently? And like within that, if you were like a child and you like have like a substantial amount of musical like practice, like you practice music for like 6 years, and that would definitely affect like your brain development and like how you might integrate with music. And I also asked like how often do you like listen to music, because that also like plays a role. And it becomes like a very like gray area where there are a couple tests out there where you can have participants like answer a bunch of questions and then give them scores, and then you can do like more statistical analysis with that. I feel like I haven't found the best form of doing that, but yeah, currently I'm doing the cutoff around like 3 years of music experience, and then trying to see if that is sufficient enough in a comparison.
I'm very, very interested in this topic, as you can see. And recently I had been wearing Oticon hearing aids.
Mm.
And I now have ear lens. I don't know if you're familiar with that product, but
I'm not actually.
okay. Well, I won't go into detailed explanation, but here's a normal hearing aid, 1K to 5K. That's what you get. That's all you get.
Mm.
Here's ear lens, 100 hertz to 10,000 hertz. So a much broader frequency range.
Nice.
And what I didn't know was that pitch perception improves significantly with overtones.
Yes.
And so I have been singing flat for about 10 years, and I was really embarrassed to know that I was subjecting people to out of tune singing. And 2 days after I got the ear lens, I went to my vocal coach, and she cried because I was singing right on key.
Wow.
And so it was totally my ears.
And that was so this is with the hearing aid.
With the ear
lens.
lens hearing aid, yeah.
That's all. Yeah, that's a really good point too, because what I was kind of like trying to say with the vocoder part, it's like you have like 4 channels, so like you only get like 100 to 4,000 hertz in that frequency range, and then the next channel is like 4,000 to 8,000, 12,000, and etc. But if you increase the number of channels, then you can start getting more granularity. So then you get like, instead of 100 to 4,000, you can get like 100 to 2,500, and then 2,500 to 4,000. You start getting you're able to get more precision like in pitch when you start being able to increase the resolution for each of those band passes.
Right.
So,
And I play a non-fixed pitch instrument.
yes.
So now I play more in tune too, although no one complained about that. But the first time I played the bass with the ear lens, I was like, wow, I have been really off. So that's for me. And musicians' brains are very different, and
Yes.
they react to sound very differently, especially if you started as a kid.
Yeah, that was the reason for doing the pneumatic, like instead of the vibrotactile, because when you do EEG studies, you can actually look at like how these we call them evoke response potentials, so like the different waves that you're looking at. And musicians, like some of the waves are more attenuated or even like more amplified compared to non-musicians, and so you can quantifiably like distinguish it that way. And so that's like, as you said, like neurologically, like your brain develops differently, and you can like show that like on EEG.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Paiwa. Thank you for your question.
We have a question here from Ken Peters. Ken, unmute yourself, please.
Yes, thank you very much. Wonderful presentation. The question I have is about music appreciation, the pleasure gained from listening to music. And I'm just wondering, I play percussion, so I'm
Limit
very
permits
much
as well.
tuned into tactile vibratory stimulation, but I wonder if that, what are your thoughts on improving music appreciation for those of us who are not CI users but have hearing aids, and even those people who have normal hearing? I mean, I remember in the 60s, we had a lot of lights going on and off all the time in psychedelic fashion. But no one's ever really pursued the vibratory tactile stimulation that I'm aware of.
That's that's correct. The most recent one is the Jeremy Morriswell one that I mentioned. But there was this one concert in Australia from they have a ear institute there, and I'm blanking on it. But they had a concert where they had 4 composers that composed music specifically for cochlear implant users. But even past within a more broad sense, I really like the idea of tailoring music for the individual, regardless of what your hearing abilities are. And I think that's something that should be explored more. And I think that would improve music appreciation. And that's where the study that Elliot mentioned, the empathetic listening study, we're looking further into that, because in that study we're having CI users listen to these different genres of music, saying what they didn't like. Oh, maybe the vocal was a little bit too loud, or I don't really like that instrument, and then mixing it so that it matches better to what they like and their own preferences are. And so in that sense, having a individualized tailoring mixing process, or an individualized tailoring music listening process, I feel would really help with music appreciation. And I also agree, I wish there was more in the space of exploring tactile stimulation on its own, and the aesthetics of that, because I feel it could be a benefit for everyone, and it could be a really fun thing to explore. I mean, as a drummer too, you kind of feel the vibrations as you're banging around and moving, and some of the instruments themselves require you to feel what the instrument's doing on a vibration level to know what you're doing. And I don't think it's talked as much of, but I think it would be. Yeah, I think there is a slight push to start going in that direction, but there's a lot of device and products out there that are this will benefit you, it's vibrating and it's matching something, but it hasn't really been explored quantitatively. It hasn't really been explored on a scientific level to see what benefits are actually being brought by these products. And so we're trying to, on a very basic science level, figure out what these benefits are.
Thank you.
Oh, very good. Bob, you have your hand up?
Yes. I played the cello for many years, and then my Meniere's disease took over, and I didn't hear, I couldn't hear music for about 30 years. And then I got cochlear implants. So I was very lucky, because within the first 6 weeks of the turning on my processor, I could hear classical music again.
That's awesome.
Yes, it was. It was such a surprise to me. I mean, I can tell the difference between an oboe and a clarinet that's.
Yeah, a lot of people can't. So that's
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
awesome.
So
It makes me happy.
yeah. So it was really wonderful. Now, I would think the tactical thing is just one. There's also visual, right?
Yes.
Right. But you haven't mentioned that. Is that because of the way you would record it or measure it?
So it's just, so there is definitely audio tactile visual, and there are some studies that have looked on that. We just kind of kept it similar just from the aspect that we wanted to eventually do the EEG study. But I think you could definitely add the visual aspect, because we do have a direct feedback where we're telling participants oops or correct when they get certain things correct. So there is in a way a visual aspect, but we're not specifically quantifying it. A way to quantify would be potentially if I said this tactile stimulation is related to the color red, and then I play I show the color red, and but then I don't play the same patterns on your fingers, there'd be a dissociation with that. And then you could, for instance, look on EEG, and you would clearly see, oh, we have this thing called mismatched negativity response, and you might see oh, okay, you learn from it, because the second I broke the pattern on your fingers, but I showed you a different color, then you had a response, a neural response that we can record.
Yeah.
And so I think there's definitely room for that. And if there's, I guess like the point where I'm at now is like there's like a lot of different ways to branch out, and there's a lot of different people that are doing things that might not necessarily be of interest to the community. And so like I'm trying to figure out what would be the, I guess, most useful and like most interesting for people, and like most valuable to bring to the forefront. But I do agree. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of room for the visual aspect that I think once you get the audio, tactile, and visual, you could definitely like separate them out and do them as individual studies and compare them all and see like which one is stronger in association too. So
Yeah.
that'd be interesting.
Well, one of the things that occurred to me is that I don't think everybody's as lucky as I was about remembering music. And of course, I do better with things I used to play.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a memory issue there. But it would seem to me like in Lisa's case, where she was not on pitch when she sang, is that how the tactical could be patterned so it would move you to the correct pitch.
Yeah, that would be interesting. So if you're like off, maybe you would like get a lot of stimulation, but then if you're on center, you would get like less or something like that. That would be really cool.
Yeah, I think that would be one of those things that would be done. Was it like an individual person who was working on a thing, and then they were working on getting the pitch correct or learning to understand what that felt like when they were correct. But that's kind of that's a very more clinical kind of thing.
Yeah, I think is really interesting too, and definitely that application is also really relevant. And the point you brought up of like you like the things that you're more familiar with is something we also looked at, because with the Twinkle Took a Little Star and the Married a Little Lamb, like the reason why we chose those songs is because like most Western listeners are familiar with them, and having something that you can already associate and then doing something different will allow you to congruently kind of converge on like, okay, this is what their associations are, because I already know the melody like really well. So then it starts to make more sense. And we had like individuals like Mark, oh, do you know these songs? And it'll be interesting to see like This Old Man was like the most messed up song, for instance, and then you could like maybe compare like, okay, now we can see like why it took people longer to learn that, because they weren't as familiar with the song.
Yeah. I left my name and phone number in the chat for you if you want to call me.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Cool.
Aaron, I have another question, if I may.
Of course.
Related to what you've been talking about. And that is, where do you see in a perfect world, where do you see an application for this technology in say 5 to 10 years, in terms of where I as a cochlear implant user could go out in the marketplace and buy some of these tactical devices and significantly improve my appreciation of music?
I guess my hope for it, because like there are currently devices out there that have, like for instance, like the David Eagleman bracelet that has like tactile simulation, but actually like I was talking to Dr. Matt Fitzgerald about it, and they're currently like trying to come back and like figure out more like how they can get more like scientific evidence to kind of show like what's going on. But I would imagine it being like some type of device, whether it's on the hands or like on the neck or like some part of the body, where like if you were to like listen to like some type of sound or some stimulus, it would be able to orientate you to like what that pitch might be, or even teach you like almost to like Raul's point, like how you would maybe like center back to like what is correct and like what that sensation is, so that you can currently be on beat, or like even on better toner's way, and also like be a device that's like comfortable, and it's not like you have to like kind of carry it everywhere like with you, that it gets in the way of like doing your daily things, which is why I think some of the bracelet things were activated. But maybe if it could be something that you do intentionally, like like you're gonna go out to a concert or something like that, and it can take some type of musical stimulus and kind of transport it to you like that fits your needs and like where you're at, and then is able to kind of enhance that experience.
But imagine in any of those scenarios, there's going to be a learning curve.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Even the study is definitely a learning curve.
How to translate that physical stimulus into, greater depth of appreciation of music.
I would hope I would want it to be like a fun process. Like with this one, it's like easy enough where like you can pick it up faster, but I feel like people would be more interested if you could like put your own song, like if you put in classical music or like a pop song that like you like really like, or a rock song, for instance, and you're able to learn like based on those songs, like the association, and it could be a fun process. And kind of going back to the music appreciation point, it could even be like, can you just experience music just like tactically and like on a somatosensory level, just tactically and enjoying the music that way. And I would hope that it could almost transcend to being its own thing, because there's a lot of assumptions that taking pitch information that, like we have like waves and they all have frequencies that kind of like they feel intuitively like that they might map, but they also might not. Like there might not be an association strong enough between. They might be independent enough where like tactile stimulation could be like its own thing. So I would think that it would be cool to explore that further. And I can imagine a world where we're like focused on the aesthetics of just tactile stimulation.
Well, that's hopeful, because I like Bob mentioned, and like probably most CI users, I can only appreciate music if it's something I know really
well. Yeah.
And then I can fill in the blanks for my memory. But to hear a piece just cold new, it's like an orchestra warming up.
It's and I think there definitely will be like a learning and a learning curve to it, and I hope in a way like maybe it'll make it more fun and like less strenuous, where maybe you can even just start with the tactile stimulation. That was kind of like my last bullet point, where you can like take out one of the stimulus, like you take out the auditory or you take out the tactile, and maybe it helps you appreciate it more, just because like you built a familiarity with like a device that you're more comfortable with, for instance.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's good. Are there any other questions for Aaron?
Yeah.
I see you have your hand up again.
Yeah. One thought that I just had was this tactile stimulation giving immediate feedback. Let's say you're singing and you're off pitch. So if I feel let's say my fifth finger being stimulated, I know what to sing with that stimulation from practice before, and it would immediately get me on tune again. And you can do that with an instrument too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, even like the bass or like
anything. I mean, if you can get immediate feedback of what it should be, that would be. I think that would be good learning.
There's also like video games like that where like you're like, if you're off balance, it'll like vibrate more and more, like, and you just have to like sit to yourself. And I feel like there's a way to make it like fun and enjoyable too, like even if it becomes like a longer learning process. But hopefully it could also be like individualistic so that anyone can like have a fun time doing it.
Sally, see your hand up. Sally, unmute yourself, please.
Yes, that would help, wouldn't it? Aaron, thank you so much for coming and doing your presentation. I would like to just make a few comments as a CI user and a person who loves music. I've never played music. I used to sing in a choir and loved that. But for a long time, of course, I've been off pitch. So what I do now is I sit in the front pew of my church where nobody can hear me because I'm, they're behind me, not in front of me. So I just sing away as the best I can. But also I have been a symphony person for many, many years. And when I got my first CI, which was about 15 years ago, I noticed a significant improvement with one CI and listening to the symphony. And when I got my second one 5 years ago, it was significantly better. And I just wanted to share that because I think this is what I hear from people considering whether to get a cochlear implant or not. They say, well, I've heard that music doesn't really get any better whenever you have CIs, and that's a negative for me. Well, I'm just here to say that it has improved my enjoyment of music with both CIs. And even My granddaughter noticed that I could hear the words on the car radio that I have not ever been able to hear with her in the 20 years that
That's
she's
amazing.
lived with me. So that's an encouragement to people that even though it's a long ways away from normal hearing, it's improving much when you have a CI. It has for me, and I'm hopeful that it will continue. The technology will continue to work on that to help us, because that's such a big part of our lives. Music is so wonderful.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you for your comments, and I definitely agree because my thesis research that I did in undergrad was kind of looking more into music appreciation, and I like found like some studies that showed like CI users after getting a cochlear implant, like actually their appreciation dropped, which was like really sad to see. But there's also like a lot of studies that showed like having almost like the support or like giving it enough time also like helps with that too. And so there's also the issue of like if we explore like training more, like maybe if the CI user was given like 3 months and like actually like was supported and how like that was for their own needs, maybe they would appreciate the music more. And also, yeah, I have like I think yeah, it goes definitely like a long way, and I appreciate you like making the comment about like how it's really improved your experience as well.
Very good. Any other questions for Aaron? Well, Aaron, this was it was wonderful of you to take the time to share your research with us, and it sounds like your research is ongoing, if I'm not mistaken. And if I hope I can persuade some of my colleagues here in the local chapters to step forward and agree or offer to participate in your research. I thought it was a very interesting. What was it, an hour or so? No more than that.
Yeah, about 50 minutes to like an hour, and yep.
And it was a very interesting exercise, and so I encourage others to do it. And again, we do appreciate you taking the time this afternoon. I think I'll turn it back over to Janie or Sally, and we'll conduct our normal chapter business meeting. But again, thank you for joining us, Aaron.
Thank you. Yeah, and I posted my email, and I got the numbers and emails that people posted, but feel free to also send me an email, and then we could definitely schedule a time. And also, if you're just interested and curious about like the work we do and things like that, I'm also happy to chat too. So thank you for giving me the space to speak again.
Aaron, one last question.
Yes.
How many sessions do you have with people that participate in your study?
So far, just one session. And it seems like the 10 minutes have been sufficient enough. But I think maybe next steps, there might be more, like, especially with the training part, maybe, but currently just one session, 50 minutes long. And you just listen to the pre, the middle, and the post, and then with the tactile stimulation.
Okay, thank you.